the landmark decision that overturned Roe v. Wade.
Democrats are calling one of the darkest days in this country's history.
Every life is important, and so that's what this is about.
It's going to be a legal civil war amongst the states.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. We've had a few days to get used to it, and yet the headline is still almost unbelievable. The US Supreme Court last week overturned Roe v Wade, effectively ruling that women do not have a constitutional right to have an abortion. Despite the lurid headlines, that doesn't mean that abortion is now banned in America, but it does give individual states the power to ban it if they wish, except where the woman's life is at risk. This is such a sensitive issue that people are talking about America entering a legal civil war. We'll discuss that with our guests in a moment, but first a quick reminder of how we got here.
Roe v. Wade has now officially been overruled.
The U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade.
22 states are banning abortions, and more could announce bans in the coming weeks.
This is a watershed moment in American history.
If you watch mainstream news networks in America, you could be forgiven for thinking that a rigged Supreme Court, manipulated by a misogynistic and racist president, has banned abortion across America, turning the country into Afghanistan and forcing women to have backstreet abortions. You may also have the impression that the country is heading towards a civil war and that people on both sides are flooding the streets in a cultural clash of the century.
My body, my choice! We won't go back! We won't go back!
Democrat politicians, from the president down, are also passionately denouncing the ruling and urging voters to support their party in the midterm elections coming up in November.
Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. This fall, we must elect more senators and representatives who will codify women's right to choose into federal law once again.
It's just stunning. And again, as a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother, to see young girls now have fewer rights than their moms or even their grandmothers is something very sad for our country.
The hell with the Supreme Court. We will defy them. Women will be in control of their bodies. And if they think black women are intimidated or afraid, they got another thought coming.
Of course, Republican politicians are also making political capital out of the ruling.
But as encouraging as today's decision is, our work is far from done. Americans remain one of only 7 countries on Earth that allow elective abortions in the 3rd trimester. Of those 7 countries that America's one of them, there's 2 others, China and North Korea.
With so much noise going on, it's easy to miss what actually happened at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's job is to uphold the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. Now, nearly 50 years ago, in Roe v. Wade, it ruled that although the Constitution does not mention abortion specifically, it does establish a fundamental right to privacy, and so women have a right to an abortion. The court also held that the right was not absolute, but must be balanced with the state's interest to protect potential life. And so the court came up with a trimester framework. In the first trimester, a woman was free to abort the fetus and the government couldn't interfere. In the second trimester, it was still the woman's choice, but the government could intervene if it was necessary to protect the woman's health. And by the third trimester, when the fetus was deemed viable, governments were allowed to prohibit abortion if they chose to do so, except where it was necessary to save the life or health of the woman.
I think that to raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event.
Abortion rights were modified by the Supreme Court nearly 20 years later in another big legal case called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. That ruling stated that our laws afford constitutional protection to personal decisions relating to marriage, procreation, contraception, and so on. The court also replaced the trimester framework by acknowledging that the point of viability had changed to about 23 or 24 weeks, thanks to medical science, could change again. Anti-abortion activists who describe themselves as pro-life have been campaigning to overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey for nearly half a century. And last week, they achieved their goal.
Worked so hard, and I know that others before me have worked even harder. And so for the older generation of pro-lifers to see this today, I'm so grateful for them and their perseverance. And I'm glad that I can be on the second kind of generation that can push this in the 50 states now.
Now, anti-abortion campaigners always argued that Roe v Wade was immoral, but that's not why the Supreme Court overturned it. It was overturned because it was deemed unconstitutional. The court made its ruling in the case of Dobbs v Jackson Women's Health Organization, which was brought before the court in December last year. The court was asked to rule if Mississippi's law banning abortion after 15 weeks was constitutional or not. It ruled 6-3 that it was. The 6 were all conservative justices. 5 of them went further, voting to strike down Roe v Wade and Planned Parenthood v Casey. Giving his majority opinion, Justice Samuel Alito wrote that Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak, and the decision had damaging consequences. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision. He went on, it is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. In their dissent, the 3 Liberal justices wrote, after today, young women will come of age with fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers had. With sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. So what happens now? Well, as the Supreme Court intended, it's down to the individual states. Take a look at this map of America. Some of the states, colored red, have already banned abortion, except in cases where the mother's life is at risk, including Alabama, and we're about to speak to the lawyer who drafted that change in the law in a moment. Other states, colored orange, are to bring in bans or severe restrictions soon. Others in yellow are thinking about it, and those in blue are pretty much the same as they were under Roe v Wade. In fact, in New York, the law permits abortion up to birth if the woman's health, including mental health, is deemed at risk. So does this mean that women can travel to other states to have an abortion? Yes, they can. In fact, many of America's biggest companies are telling employees they'll pay their travel expenses. In the banking sector, we're talking about Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and JP Morgan. In family entertainment, it's Disney, Netflix, and Warner Brothers Discovery. Tech firms like Apple and the Facebook parent Meta have also told employees their benefits packages cover out-of-state travel. It's worth noting that some critics of the Dobbs ruling complain that the court was rigged by the former president, Donald Trump, who managed to get 3 conservative justices on the court during his term in office. He did choose them. That was his right as president. They all went through the usual Senate confirmation hearings, though, and were approved. Those hearings were no walk in the park.
You're not lying.
I'm not lying. I took that oath before I began as a judge on the 7th Circuit, and I have not violated that oath, and I would take it again.
And it is worth remembering that when Trump was on the campaign trail back in 2016, he was very clear he'd like to see the Supreme Court overturn Roe v Wade, and he still won the election.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
Just before we bring in our guests, a quick look at how Donald Trump's successor, President Joe Biden, has changed his opinion over the years. As we know, he's firmly in favor of Roe v Wade and abortion rights now, but back in 2006, when he was a senator, he held quite different views.
I do not view abortion as a choice and a right. I think it's always a tragedy, and I think that it should be rare and safe. And I think we should be focusing on how to limit the number of abortions.
Okay, let's bring in our 2 guests now. And to be clear, we're not looking at the morality of abortion on this show. We're looking at the legal and political implications, which is why we have 2 lawyers with us. Eric Johnston is president of the Alabama Pro-Life Coalition, and Titus Nichols runs his own law firm in Georgia. He also ran as a Democratic candidate for the state Senate just last month. Welcome, both of you. I also want to make it clear for our audience, we did invite female lawyers and doctors to be part of the program. Unfortunately, we didn't get them to appear in time. So it falls to you 2. to talk about the law. And Eric Johnston, if I could start with you, why do you agree it was the correct legal decision to overturn Roe v. Wade?
From the very beginning, we never agreed that the Roe or the Casey decision that followed was correct. It determined that there was a fundamental right for abortion, and it was based on different kinds of theories they came up with and finally said, well, it's a privacy right, and then they expanded it and said it's a liberty right. But those rights are based in very intricate and detailed legal questions and procedures. The opinion in Dobbs examined those and pointed out that in order to have those kinds of rights that are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution, you have to have a long history of those rights existing, or you have to have a liberty interest that affects everyone. The opinion by Alito very accurately examined the history, which the Roe opinion did not, and pointed out that until the 20th century, most states, or in fact, into the 20th century, all states had laws prohibiting abortion. It was a states' rights issue. And so ultimately, what Alito did in this opinion is he determined that that right did not exist. It was something the states needed to regulate, and it would go back to the states. He examined it through the doctrine of stare decisis. That's a doctrine that says we build on precedent, just like the common law of England, we build on precedent. And the court, in the opinion, said that there was no precedent really to build this on, and that the stare decisis, and he examined many facets of it, determined that it did not require the court to follow an erroneous precedent, and examined that in detail. So in the end, it really threw out both opinions on the basis that the constitutional rights don't exist. It goes back to the states where it belongs.
Titus Nichols, you think the Supreme Court got it wrong. Why?
I do. The Dobbs decision opens a Pandora's box of problems in regards to our privacy rights. The decision says that the decision with tying Casey as well as Roe versus Wade was not based upon history and tradition. That's a very self-serving statement from the Supreme Court, considering America has a history and tradition of slavery, history and tradition of denying women the right to vote, history and tradition of locking up Japanese Americans because we think they're spies during World War II. So to simply say that unless it's explicitly enumerated, it has to come from history and tradition, completely ignores the fact that this decision takes away a fundamental right that Americans have had for the past 50 years. And more importantly, this creates a bigger problem. Just because a state outlaws abortion doesn't mean abortions are magically going to stop. Women are going to continue to have them. The problem is if they don't have access to safe legal facilities in their own states, they're going to go to unsafe methods to accomplish the same goal.
Titus, I appreciate that the United States has some parts of their history which is deplorable, and you wouldn't wish to base a law on it. But the point is in Roe v. Wade is that they said they could base the constitutional right to have an abortion on previous laws, and according to the ruling and Eric Johnston here, it just wasn't the background, the history to support that.
And this is why I say it opens up Pandora's box, because if you're going to go down the path of, well, it's not explicitly stated in the Constitution, it doesn't explicitly state in the Constitution that schools have to be integrated. Yet Brown versus Board of Education found that it was against the Constitution to separate students based upon race. What's going to be next after abortion? You're going to have access to contraception. There's going to be same-sex marriages, which is not explicitly stated in the Constitution. By saying that you have to have an explicit mention of the Constitution, it's giving the far right in this country the opportunity to whittle away at issues that they have been against for decades.
Come in, Eric.
Yes, I'm sorry, but all of that is totally incorrect. Everything that he mentioned about slavery and integration and all that, there's a long history of that. There was no long history of abortion. There are rights in the Constitution that are based on history and based on previous activities. Abortion was not one of those. It never existed as a right. And to open Pandora's box is an argument that's misleading people in the United States right now. Both Alito and Kavanaugh, who concurred in the opinion, both pointed out that this is not going to go back and change other privacy rights that have to do with same-sex marriage, contraception, or anything else. They were very specific to point that out and said the main difference here is that this deals with the potential of human life, whichever way you look at it, and it's a very different kind of thing.
That's an interesting point, isn't it, Titus? Because it's not just about the right of the woman. There is also the state's obligation to protect potential life.
That's if there was a agreement upon when life begins. And as we all know, scientifically, there is no agreement that life begins at conception. Now, again, we're not getting into morality here, but from a scientific point of view, there is no human life that is existing at the 6-week mark. And I say 6 weeks because particularly in my state, that is where the legislature has drawn the line of saying that a woman cannot receive an abortion after that point. In regards to the statements from Kavanaugh saying that this decision does not go to any other substantive right, number one, Kavanaugh testified that he believed that Roe versus Wade was established law, and you see how he went back on his opinion there. And number two, you have the concurring opinion from Justice Clarence Thomas saying, well, the court should go back and look at other cases that have established substantive due process, such as cases dealing with same-sex marriages, access to birth control,
Eric?
and on and on and on. So to simply say that, well, the Supreme Court's just going to stick to abortion, they're not going to re-examine any other substantive right, is very naive.
Eric, quick question about Justice Kavanaugh. Titus is making the point there that in his Senate confirmation hearings, he seemed to agree that Roe v. Wade was established law, and people are accusing him of lying in those hearings.
Well, if you carefully review what he said in his concurring opinion in Dobbs and what he testified to in the Senate hearings, it was almost identical. He did not lie. He made accurate statements. If you look at any hearings on any nominee for the Supreme Court, they've always said we can't rule on anything. If it's
okay,
a precedent,
I need to jump in.
Yes, it's a precedent.
We only have 10 minutes left. Titus Nichols, the Justice Alito, in his opinion, said that the states should decide abortion laws in a democratic way. That's how society operates anyway. You try to convince your fellow citizen, and then you make a law based on that. What's wrong with it going to the states?
The problem with that is that the states select their legislature in an undemocratic manner. You see that the Supreme Court just ruled on a case regarding Louisiana's maps that they're drawn and how they're affecting minorities' ability to vote. Particularly here in Georgia and other states, including Alabama, you have an issue of gerrymandering, where the elected officials get to pick their voters and the voters don't get to pick their elected officials. So it's not as if there's going to be some statewide vote on should abortion be illegal or illegal. What's going to happen is you're going to have a particular legislature, probably a Republican, put forth a bill on the floor for the legislature to vote on. And then those legislators will vote on the law. And if the legislature is dominated by Republicans, such as in Alabama and Georgia, then what the Republicans want, their end goal, is going to become the law. It is not going to be.
Okay, well, let's look at a real life example of that. And Eric Johnston, you are part of a real life example. You drafted Alabama's new law on abortion, which came into effect as soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned. And your state is no longer allowing abortions full stop. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And that law was passed by a democratic process. I'm sorry, my worthy opponent does not agree that democracy is the proper way to answer the problems and questions that we face. It's certainly not up to judges sitting in chairs to make decisions on things that affect the people as a whole. I believe in the democratic process, but I also believe there's a constitution that keeps them in line. And that's exactly what's happened with Dobbs. And I believe we'll have probably about half the states in the U.S. will permit abortion, about half will not.
Did you put the proposed law to the public to vote on?
We have a constitutional amendment in Alabama that the people voted on as a basis for our law, and it passed by 60% of the vote.
Titus, 60% of the vote?
Yeah, and a constitutional amendment voted on in a referendum by people. Then the legislature passes a statute that gave operative provisions basically to that constitutional amendment.
Titus, democracy in action.
So going back to your question was his law put on the ballot? He said there was a referendum that was the basis for his law. So those are two different things. And it goes back to the original problem of that our legislature is decided by a gerrymandering process. So no, it is not going to be a straight up and down vote that's going to be put before the people. It's going to be a Republicans going to put forth a bill to the legislature floor, and other Republicans who have the majority will vote in favor of that bill. It will be signed by a Republican governor, and then that will be the law for the entire state.
Okay, Eric, a rebuttal?
I think the vote of the people, they voted the elected representatives to represent them to carry out things. If you can look in California, New York, Illinois, they all have Democrat-controlled legislatures and they pass laws to prevent abortion. It is a democratic process. It is fair. It is the best one that works in the world. And I think that it will continue to work well if we observe it and we appreciate it.
Eric, does your law make any provisions for the woman's health or life?
Yes, it does.
Can you explain?
Yes, if there is a health issue that her doctor can identify, if there's impairment of a major bodily function, if there's a suicide risk, those exceptions exist in the law.
And can I ask you about in cases of rape and incest?
Rape and incest are not included because those would be inconsistent with the view that the child is an unborn person. Medical science has greatly identified the personhood, the humanity of the unborn child in the last 50 years through fetal photography, sonography, pain, heartbeat. All those things go down to a very low age of the unborn child. And so some states may not want to observe that, but others do. And that is answering the question of whether the unborn child is a person. Yes, it is a person. It's nothing else but a person.
Titus, a lot of people around the world will be shocked to hear that Alabama's new abortion law does not permit abortion even in cases of rape and incest. But, as Eric Johnston was saying, in order to be consistent, the circumstances should not be taken into account when trying to define if the unborn is a person and enjoys the rights of a person.
That's a position of enforcing morality onto the law. By saying that, okay, we'll allow it under this situation, but not incest and rape, you're enforcing your own sense of morality, because it is your own sense of morality that says this is a human life, even though science does not establish that. You even have Republicans who aren't sure exactly where they stand on it. Here in Georgia, you have a candidate for lieutenant governor who, before the Dobbs decision, said he wanted to completely ban abortion. But now that he sees the fallout from the Dobbs decision, he's changed his position and said that, yes, there should be exceptions. So this idea of we're going to make it a very, very narrow situation in which a woman can obtain an abortion is merely enforcing a selective set of morals onto what should be a decision between a woman and her medical provider.
Titus, can I just flip this around for a moment? And if we're going to stray into morals, we have to talk about New York. There are many people around the world who would be absolutely horrified to find out that in New York, women are permitted to have abortions right up to birth if their health, including mental health, is affected.
And that's why it goes back to it's a decision between a woman and her doctor. This is not about waving around a flag saying, oh, we love abortions, everybody should get one. That's a very tough decision that any woman has to make. The problem with these laws is, number one, it strips that right to make a decision away from a woman. And number two, it's going to put an unfair, not even unfair, a dangerous burden on those who do not have resources. Because if you live in Georgia or Alabama and your state doesn't permit abortion, you have to travel to a different state. Well, that's fine if you have the money and the resources to go to a different state, stay in a hotel, and get safe, legal medical treatment. But if you don't, you're going to be forced to seek other methods.
Eric Johnston, Titus has brought up the point about traveling. Will you and your state attempt to prohibit the travel into other states by women who are seeking abortions?
No, the women are free to go to other states, and the law specifically exempts women from prosecution. They go to another state and get an abortion, and I think there is plenty of opportunity to do that because there will be many states that allow that, and they will have many of the corporations now saying they will pay to have women go there. I think Titus argues with himself on morality. The Supreme Court itself, the liberal Supreme Court, even said after viability, the child has a right to live and the state can make that decision. I think your observation about New York is a very good one and shows the problems with those on the other side of this issue.
Eric, we're coming towards the end of the program. Probably a final question for both of you. Biden and others have said that this is not over and they are pointing people towards the midterm elections. In other words, vote Democrat, and we can do something about this. Eric, first of all, what sort of challenge are you expecting? And I'll come to you, Titus.
Well, I think it will be an issue for some people. I think the economy and inflation will be probably a bigger issue for most. I believe the Biden administration will do everything it can to keep abortion legal, operating through executive orders and agencies. All of that will end up in litigation about whether state or federal law will control. Ultimately, we have to remember that the court said the Constitution does not address abortion. the Congress in the United States could pass a national law permitting abortion. That is a possibility. That's why the midterm elections are so very important.
Titus, is that what you expect the Democrats to do?
I expect that's what the game plan is going to be for the Democrats. The unfortunate hurdles of the fact that you have gerrymandering that's going to come between the voters and success and them choosing which representatives they want to speak for them in Congress and in the Senate. So yes, ideally Democrats would increase their margins within the House and in the Senate and therefore codify a woman's right to seek an abortion. However, there are many procedural hurdles that have been put in place by both the far right and conservative judges that makes that a very difficult game plan to accomplish.
Titus Nichols, Eric Johnston, thank you both for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.